We want to get an idea of extending this deadline for closures of the U.S. Embassy through the 10th. What does that illustrate about the severity of the threat?
Well, it demonstrates that, at least at this point, the threat streams are still credible. The agencies are likely moving on all threat streams in coordination with our allies in the region. And at this point, given that no attack has occurred, it's the administration erring on the side of caution by extending it through the remainder of the Muslim holiday of Ramadan.
And Chad, what does it say about Al-Qaeda?
Well, it definitely indicates that those who have predicted that it is decimated to the point of not being functional, perhaps declaring the decline too soon. It also indicates that at this stage, what we saw, which is with the decapitation of the core Al-Qaeda, i.e. the killing of bin Laden, we're now seeing version 2.0 of Al-Qaeda, which is a leaderless jihad, where you've got, unlike a snake where if you cut off the head, that body dies, this is more like a cancer where it metastasizes and there are cells throughout the body that have to be attacked individually. And so we have to keep checking in to make sure that this cancer is in remission.
Chad, does that make Al-Qaeda 2.0 or 3.0 more dangerous, perhaps, than the original version?
It makes it a lot more dangerous. Just like in the Cold War, when our main adversary was the Soviets and it was a bilateral dynamic. In this case, it's a much more multi-faceted threat, and therefore, as you can imagine, it's much more decentralized. And again, going back to the analogy of the cancer, it makes it more difficult to track. And when we looked at the evidence that was extracted from the compound in Abbottabad where bin Laden was held up, the computers and thumb drives showed that there was a debate going on between the older generation and the younger generation. The older generation wanted the younger generation to wait and not attack and do more big attacks like bin Laden did. The younger generation, Anwar al-Awlaki and others, were arguing, no, we need to get some points on the board. We've got to show that we're still alive and relevant. And so that's, I think, what we're seeing now is this administration's concern that the Generation 2.0 is prepared to do additional lower-level attacks to demonstrate that they are still relevant.
You know, Chad, you say they're more dangerous, but they also violated traditional terrorist methods like using a cell phone. I mean, what is that helped the U.S. government be able to track down these threats?
Well, it does, and I think two points. One is you obviously have to consider that perhaps they were doing that intentionally, but I think there's enough preponderance of evidence to indicate that that's not the case here. And secondly, as in any operation, there's going to be some breakdown, and so it does show that our intelligence surveillance programs, particularly the ones that are being debated right now in this country on the PRISM program in particular, that shows that our continued use of our tools abroad are being effective in intercepting even some of the most sensitive conversation of Al-Qaeda operatives.
Chad, how much of this decision to close down these embassies for the time being and diplomatic outposts is a result of Benghazi? And if it is, how much of that is because of security and how much of that is because of politics?
Well, it's both precaution and politics. I mean, I think the professionals that are advising the president are thinking about this purely from the standpoint of what makes sense for the nation and our citizens. But you can't remove it from the politics of Benghazi. And the unfortunate reality is that our embassies abroad are at risk. We have not sufficiently funded their protection, and it's good to see that Congress has plussed up another $48 million for their protection in the upcoming year. But in the interim, they remain exposed, and those like Susan Rice, who are now the National Security Advisor, who unfortunately she wasn't able to become Secretary of State because of Benghazi, and she's the one that's leading the discussion here. There's no question that that's a scar on this administration that will ultimately color their judgment on what needs to be done. And I'm sure the president's instructed his team that he does not want another Benghazi on his watch.